What if in a moment that's contentious in a meeting, we thought to ourselves, how can I support you? Don't you think that would make things go a lot differently? That is just one little nugget of wisdom that DeTerrence Allen, my guest today on the ABA Speech podcast, shares with us. We had a wonderful conversation today all about soft skills, communication skills. What does it just mean to be a nice human, a collaborative professional? I first learned about DeTerrence Allen because I went to the Black Men in Behavior Analysis conference this past fall. It was the first conference. I know how hard it is to put on a conference, and I was so excited to support this brand new conference. And it was just his talk really kind of struck a chord with me because he is just very kind. He's a natural storyteller. I'd love to bring him back for a CEU course in the ABA Speech Connection someday. But if you're new to him, he is a board-certified behavior analyst, and he has been providing services across Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee. He's also been an adjunct professor. What I thought was really amazing is that he is married to somebody who is a BCBA, and he has an aunt and uncle that are a BCBA as well. If you're a speech language pathologist, a BCBA, a teacher, this is a really wonderful conversation on how important soft skills are if you are trying to be better with that in your own life, or whether you are supporting others on this journey to communication, being empathetic, having these light bulb moments that we can work together when times are great or when we're struggling together as a team because we're coming from the same place of wanting to support learners. So let's get into this conversation all about soft skills. I'm Rose Griffin, a speech therapist, board-certified behavior analyst, and founder of ABA Speech. It wasn't all that long ago that I felt overwhelmed by providing therapy for my autistic students and any students who were not yet speaking. Fast forward through many doubts, tears, research, and courses, and you will see the framework that I use today and share with over 60,000 readers weekly. One that will help you support your students and feel more confident in the process. I created the ABA Speech podcast to give you simple, step-by-step strategies to help you reach all of your students wherever they are on their communication journeys. If you're a speech therapist, BCBA, RBT student, or parent who's looking to help all students develop a way to communicate with the world, you are in the right place, friend. Let's get started. Welcome to the show. We have a great guest for you today. We have with us DeTerrence Allen. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Well, I'm excited to be here today. Like I said, I'm always interested in being able to share my experiences with different audiences, and I know that you have a real broad audience.
Yes. And we actually are kind of pivoting our podcast a little bit. It used to be called Autism Outreach. And when your episode airs, it's going to be called the ABA Speech Podcast, just to kind of broaden up. And I think even this episode kind of gets into people that are listening, a lot of speech therapists, BCBAs, some parents, about a topic that maybe isn't necessarily tied to autism, but obviously we're both kind of supporting or have supported autistic learners. So I feel like there's a ability to broaden up our topic. So this is episode 200 plus. So we're getting into topics that might be a little more broad, which is exciting for me, you know? And I came across your information. I share this a lot on the show. Social media is a big part of my life. Some days I'm like excited about that, you know, when a video goes viral, and other days I'm like, oh my gosh. But LinkedIn, I love because it came across my feed that there was going to be a conference that was the first one. And I just know I do a lot of professional development. I go to conferences, I've put on conferences. And so I really wanted to support your conference. So it was the Black Men in Behavior Analysis, and you were a speaker on that. And so I attended that conference virtually, and I really loved your talk. So was it a cool experience to be part of that first conference like that?
Definitely, definitely. Just seeing the hard work that the individuals from the conference committee did in establishing a well-run conference. And so like the ability to show up and then be authentically myself, not having to kind of gauge or code switch between some of your professional dialect and some of the individuals that you would be speaking to in your community. And so understanding that like that the work that Jaron and Dr. Bruce Tenor has done to
Hmm.
really kind of put together a group of individuals whose sole purpose is to be able to help entrust the access of behavior analysis to a group of men and men that are doing a lot of good work in the community. And so I'm excited about that. And anytime I can kind of give back in that capacity is always amazing to me.
Yeah, and I had Bruce on my podcast. He's amazing. I met him also on LinkedIn, and we had a
Yeah.
conversation last year. It was kind of tied to like ABA in a public school setting, kind of in the role that he's in and supporting larger teams and things. But he is everywhere presenting and keynoting. So I'm really
Okay.
excited for him. And I love that. On the last episode I just taped a little while ago, I was talking about the fact that I went to 11 conferences in 2024. And it all started with the invitation to do a keynote, which really, really scared me. So then I was like, I have to start presenting a lot more in person. And so I was on this whole mission. But I have three kids, so and a husband. And so next year I think I'm going to go to two conferences. But it is really fun to like do the conferences in person. But it is nice to do a virtual conference. I'm not going to lie, presenting from your home office is pretty fun, right?
You know, I go back and like I had practiced and kind of prepared my material and usually like my spiel or my presentations in person, I get to interact with the environment. I get to interact with the listeners and kind
Hmm.
of really engage and tailor my talk based off of the audience.
Right.
So in the virtual world, it's not as fluid. You have to kind of be comfortable with saying what you're going to say. And so,
Hmm.
luckily, I have an amazing community of behavior analysts that are around me. My wife is actually a behavior analyst as well, and so
Oh.
it kind of she was my audience in the moment, and just to kind of hear her give me and kind of shout me out in that particular way. The one thing that I think that from that talk that if I could piece anything together, was the ability to pivot in a professional lens.
Hmm.
And what pivoting for me looks like is a lot of times people will say, well, you need to say this professionally. I think
Yep.
Tyra Sellers does a amazing talk on how to not weaponize the word professionalism.
Mm.
And I think that if you take it a step further, as practitioners, the large number of practitioners that are entering into the workforce right now that have less than 5 years of experience, you're like, well, they're so unprofessional. Well, what do you mean professional? Um,
Right.
let's give behavior specific feedback. And I even look at the opportunities in which I've I've experienced where people are like, did you really have to put that in the email or you come to a one-on-one meeting with your manager and then your
Hmm.
manager says, I'm really concerned, but doesn't give you like practical steps in order to actually implement some type of corrective feedback.
Yeah.
And those become moments where you like, what is going on, right? This doesn't feel good. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
and
Oh, that's interesting. I know Tyra Sellers. I haven't had her on the show yet, but I like that idea because, I'm duly certified as a speech therapist in BCBA. So, and I teach an ethics class at Kent State. And one of the things we talk about is using understandable language. But I always, if I'm going to talk to speech therapists, I feel more at ease in how I'm going to talk to speech therapists, even though I feel like some of them are judging me because I'm a BCBA, and that's a whole other show on collaboration. But when I go to ABA conferences, I always include a slide. And when I do my virtual talks in the membership, ABA Speech Connection membership, I always say, this is how I'm going beyond the task list because I don't always speak in really technical jargon type terms. I think I identify more as a speech language pathologist. So I know what you're saying, though. I mean, it's a different perspective. But when I go to, like, I just presented at FABA in Autism, New Jersey, and those were both ACE talks. And I always try to make sure, that I discuss research. But the way that I am, just my personality is more, I guess, real world. I think it's great to have people on that talk like really technical, and I like to learn from those types of people. I think that's good for our field too. But I think it's good to talk about like these actionable strategies. I like that. How to not weaponize the word professionalism. That's interesting.
yeah,
I haven't seen that one yet. So That's cool. But I loved your talk at the conference for in Blackman and Behavior Analysis. It was talking about soft skills. So well, let me step back though. How did you, and I didn't know you were married to a BCBA. That's kind of fun. How did
Yeah.
you like, how did you know you wanted to become a BCBA or what's your journey into the field?
Yeah, well, honestly, like my whole family are they're all BCBAs, which is
Oh,
crazy.
yeah.
So my uncle is a BCBA. I have an aunt that's a
Oh,
BCBA, and I have a my spouse is a BCBA, and so
oh
she
wow.
is or my wife is amazing, and so she recently took the test and passed, and I
Oh,
was super excited for her. Um,
yeah.
Honestly, the way that I kind of found my way into this was I was doing some work at a clinic and fresh out of high school, and there was a family, and this was my love story. And I say this, every BCBA has a love story and how they got into the field, whether it was a heartfelt breakup or it was an opportunity like this person really made you love this field. And so I never forget the family had three individuals that were on the spectrum, and you know. I didn't have a clue as to what autism was. I didn't have a clue as to what behavior analysis was. I just knew that like I had a knack for working with kids
Hmm.
and just generally love the ability to kind of work with these with this family. And I never forget the mother said, we were just having casual conversation after session one day. And she was like, we hadn't been out to eat in at a restaurant in over like 8 or 9 years. I said, what? What do you
Right.
mean? She said, well, we have three kids and all of them have disabilities. And, you can visualize people staring at us because we have one kid that is like throwing stuff and one kid
Right.
that usually looks like he has a disability. And I said, what do you mean? Like it still just seems so baffling to me.
Right.
Um, and I know over that summer we worked intensively. So we started with like 5 minutes at a restaurant, and at that 5 minutes we programmed some really good things. At like when any of the brothers needed to take a break, they would get this break card, and in whether they were verbal or nonverbal, we had
Right.
a range of communication that could be utilized, and then from there you found where like, oh my goodness, like, oh, we're up to 15 minutes at a dinner table and mild behaviors that like
Right.
it wasn't like that it was perfect. There was a little bit of potatoes on the side, and there was some string beans and some it didn't be, but that was normal. Like that was
Right.
okay. And by the end of the summer, I was like, I know what I want to do. And previously I was like, I'm gonna be in the army, I'm gonna be a firefighter, a politician,
Right.
and
Right.
there were so many other things that I kind of tried my hat at, and it just didn't fit me.
Yeah.
And it just kind of goes to that core value. Like I really believe that we are given the God granted ability to be here and help someone. And that's
Yeah.
what a behavior analysis essentially gives you the opportunity to do.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to make every speech therapist who doesn't like ABA listen to this podcast because I love that. I love that so much. Yes. And everybody has a love story. I like how you frame that. That's perfect. So today, in today's episode, I want to talk about what you kind of discussed a little bit in the conference is the importance of soft skills in the field. And I love this because I teach an ethics class here at Kent State. And the first book we read is the Bailey and Birch text, which is all about the code. And then the next book that we read is this book. I think it's 25 Strategies. And
Yeah.
it's really about soft skills, these skills that I know a lot of students probably blow those readings off, but I'm like, no, no, this is what's the most important thing. If you don't have these communicative abilities and these soft skills, it's going to be hard to actually do the work that's the important work. So, but for our listeners that may not be familiar with that, I mean, I feel like I worked in middle school, high school, so I talked about soft skills a lot as it ties to vocation and communication. But can you kind of give us some examples of what soft skills would be?
So one thing, particularly in the realm of supervision, is where you hone in on those skills. And a lot of times, I've realized that my soft skills for as a practitioner were developed over my experiences. And
Hmm.
one experience that I can kind of recall was actually working with a speech pathologist, and we literally have varying degrees of how we talk about verbal behavior. And I was like, no, it needs to be done just like this. And so, like, as a young practitioner, and saying like, I understand what a man, what a tact and an introverbal is,
Right.
and if I were to approach this particular situation or uh, 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 this conflict that arose with the attitude that I'm right, you're wrong, and that's the end of it. I wasn't going to get far.
Mm-mm.
And I, speaking with this speech pathologist, we worked with this learner, and this learner had multiple diagnoses, one being Down syndrome and the other being autism, with also some hearing impairments as well. So there was a lot of different things that were making the quality of life for this individual very tough. And
Hmm.
then my soft skills, or the lack thereof soft skills in this way, could have been like really harmful.
Hmm.
Because I had this attitude that I was like, no, we need to do this particular way. And I
Right.
just remember having the dialogue with her, and the light bulb went off for me. She can be right and I can be right. It's not either or. They can
Right.
simultaneously exist. And it changed my attitude about how we collaborate with professionals.
Hmm.
And we had one, like, honestly, she's one of the greatest colleagues I've had, because she literally comes from a different field of
Hmm.
study, and we were able to connect and then talk about the sciences that we both respect and love, and be able to help someone else. And so I said all that to say this: soft skills are, if you break it down into its smallest essence, is the ability to not only make decisions that are morally just. And
Hmm.
I know morals, they're out there, and everyone has different morals. But when you think about morally just in the best interest of the individual that you're working with in the workplace,
Hmm.
and that's tough, because you're telling me that I can't tell you to go in there and, like, hey, and believe it or not, like, there's times in which we're talking about people with BO, like body odor, and
Right.
oh my goodness, do you like, how do I tell you that you stink right now?
Right.
No, I think that those become sensible, like, discussions that you're like,
Hmm.
what? No, like, that's not something that you would think you would have to have the soft skills enough to be able to communicate in a
Right.
place.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, I think I saw that in a Facebook group once. I feel like people, like you said, like so many people, our field is growing rampantly, so rapid. And people are getting moved into these clinical director roles or leadership roles. And these things come up, and it's like, well, how am I going to have a critical conversation about that? It's really nuanced. And I don't think there is enough information. There's just not enough information like in our training, right? We don't get a ton of training as an under or in our coursework. I don't think on soft skills. I mean, I know I use that ethics book as a teacher in this class, but I'm looking back on my coursework sequence, which was great. I went to UN, took my classes at UNT, but I'm not sure that it was stressed enough. Do you think it's something that probably once we get out into the field, it's almost like we're up to our own devices. And I think some people are going to be better at this. Like, I love how you said I had a light bulb moment and we could both be right. I like that. Because I think that it has been a shift in the field where there are so many new people coming into the field that it is a little more, seems progressive, and we're trying to all get along and not be so black and white. But I do think that soft skills are something that newly minted professionals across the fields probably struggle with, don't you think?
Yeah, and not only do they struggle with, it's like almost like, and I know currently the board has standards as it relates to, if you're going to supervise someone that's going to be a behavior analyst within your
Right.
first year, you need to get oversight from a consulting supervisor.
Right.
But there also is, like, there should be this urge that, although the board doesn't tell you to do this, there
Right.
still a responsibility to our caregiver or to our service recipients that we are continuing that oversight. And I think what happens a lot of times is after I've gotten my 2,000 hours, oh, I'm a BCBA, I passed the test, I don't need to do anything else now. But that's like the bare minimum to enter
Right.
the field, like for you to hold the credentials. And so,
Mhm.
and I think about it like this, like when I first got my license, my driver's license, I wasn't driving it at night because my parents didn't trust me at that point because,
Right.
there were still things that they needed to be able to see.
Hmm.
And although I passed this 15-minute test, over exaggeration, we know it's 4 hours and
Right.
but although I passed this test, it didn't make me the qualified enough to do some of the NASCAR maneuvers at this point. I don't have a control over things at that point. And one thing that I realized is like during my time as a supervisor, one thing that I've kind of embedded, particularly when I was in clinic, I had a group of individuals that, we really set up situation and scenarios in which we can put each other in those tough and comfortable moments.
Hmm.
And so, like the first time that some of my students encountered negative feedback in a parent session wasn't when they first passed the test. It was
Hmm.
like you had been in one of those situations with me, and I wanted you to see how I modeled it. And then I
Hmm.
also wanted to do it in a role play. And in this role play, I was probably more animated than what I should be. But the thing was like, I need you to feel this. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of times what happens is we will cultivate these moments, right? And then we don't do it enough. Like, oh, we did that one role play like over the course of a year, but that's not
Right.
something that you're regularly pulling out of your arsenal. Like, that's not a fluid skill.
Yeah.
So the thing that like I can remember this one particular student. And we were in the role play that we were doing. There was a parent that was disgruntled, and she was pretty sure that her treatment plan was the most appropriate. And there also was a advocate at the school, and so we made this up based off of
Hmm.
experience that I had had.
Yeah.
And midway through, the person that was in the role play of the parent, she said, you know what? Um, this actually is very close to my actual experience with my child. None of us knew that she had a child with a disability.
Oh, wow.
Had been going through this. So she knew every nuance to kind of go through.
Hmm.
And here it is. The student was like, she was very righteous and she was like very forthcoming in saying that like, why won't they understand? Well, what did you do to make it acceptable for them to agree with you? And I think that we fail to realize how do we make friends?
Yeah.
Sometimes the basics of behavior analysis is how to provide reinforcement and pair yourself with things that are going to make those tough conversations more digestible at that time. Um,
Yeah.
and that's the hard part. So, like, have
Mhm.
you done the legwork so that before you get into this IEP meeting, before you get into this parent training session, to know enough about the person that you're interacting with, that you know what? DeTerrence really doesn't like when I do this. So I probably need to make sure that while I'm delivering some of this information, I'm cognizant of those things.
Mhm.
At least don't say like make comments about his weight. Wow.
Right,
Like
right.
no, I'm not gonna talk about his weight because he's already still, those
Right.
and you would
Know the
think
person. Yeah.
yeah, you would think you wouldn't have to say those things. However,
Right.
what I'm realizing is there are not only cultural sensitivities, but there are
Mhm.
region sensitivities that we need to be aware of. The
Yeah.
way that I would unpack certain things in a parent session for someone that is from the deep South versus
Hmm.
someone that's from California, uh,
Right.
or Ohio. You
Right.
need to be aware of the region that you're in and some of the norms, at least to the point where, like, hey, if I come in, there's a degree of like, hey, you need to wipe your shoes off, like before you
Right.
need to make sure. And like, hey, if someone offers you food, like in the South, it's really big if you don't accept it. Like, what do you
Right.
mean? Like,
Just put it on your plate.
mostly, yeah.
Right. It's under $10. Just put it on your plate. You know, I know I used to have parents that would bring, donuts and, all that. It is, I like that idea though, because yeah, it just goes back to relationship building. And I always say that, like, it's not going to be conflict free. There was this article I talk about from ASHA, the speech therapy organization, kind of the equivalent to the BACB for speech therapists. And it's like about conflict in IEP teams, because I worked for 10 years in a really litigious, very affluent area. So lawyers, advocates, all that. And it wasn't that, it's just that was how we had IEP meetings. They were very long, they're very stressful. But you have to try on some level to know that you have tried to have ongoing communication. You're documenting everything. You're being respectful. You're trying to be kind. You're trying to think in the parent's shoes. This is their child. They're scared. They're nervous, all those things. And I always try to put myself in that situation. It's very helpful if you have an administration that's very strong and very helpful, that you also have a district attorney. And we did have all those things when I sat in all these meetings for most of my treating career have been extremely litigious. So a lot of the content I make on social media is about IEP meetings, which people really appreciate because it's stressful, right? But you want to try to have that rapport before you start talking about things that are emotionally triggering and
All right.
charging. I feel like, yeah,
I
for
think
parents.
that's one of the like, and honestly, like within the last 2 months, um, I sat in an IEP meeting and we talk about how those soft skills can have not only overlay in the IEP meeting, but it also has overlay within how we collaborate and talk to other professionals. And
Hmm.
I was sitting in this really tough IEP meeting, and mind you, this the from the perspective of the parent identified as an African American
Yeah.
female, and her son was a pretty older African American male, and we're sitting in a room full of like attorneys and advocates and teachers, and there's about 20 people,
One of those. Ugh.
for me, if I was in a room with 20 people like that, and all under the pretense that this is for my child, but
Right.
none of them really know my child. And so I was kind of new to the team. And one of the things that the parent, and I realized this, like, me and her were going kind of back and forth, and I was kind of saying like, "Hey, I really want us to attend to the data. I want us to be,
Yeah.
conscientious of what we're seeing." And the one thing that the parent kept telling me was, "You just don't know my child, right?
Yeah.
You don't understand my child. Like, there are so many details that the school is maybe missing because I'm seeing it at home. And I know that he struggles with these things, and I know that these things are hard for you to believe." And I said, and the point of contention for me was, she was really adamant that she needed someone that, and as I say it, it becomes like, um, almost like the aha moment comes back, and she says, "You don't understand what it's like to be a African American male with a disability." I said, "What? No one else at this table, like, I'm the only other person at this table that would understand that."
Right. Yeah.
But I was wrong. And
Right.
and in this moment, like, I can be fully transparent. Like, I was absolutely wrong. I've never had a disability, and
Right.
I don't know what it was like. And I had, all of the available resources, to make appropriate recommendations, but
Yeah.
it's her life. And we talk about the essence of soft skills. And we want to we have our ethics code, but soft skills go a little bit deeper. It's your
Hmm.
morals and how your morals align with the greater population. And then you go back and you say, "You know what? I just want to be a decent human being."
Right.
Like, not a behavior analyst, not
Uh-huh. Right.
anything greater than who I am. But if I talk
Right.
about being a decent human being, like, this is an empathetic moment in which, like, hey,
Hmm.
how can I best support you? So now your language in a soft skills setting changes. Like we may not have to change every part of this person's support system right now. Maybe we just target one thing that the parent wants. Uh,
Right.
and we built from there, and we were able to have some really good strategic conversations. And she then came back and said, you know what? You probably did understand. I was just really, you know, I was really heated in the moment and
Right.
was able to kind of reflect, and I was able to reflect and realizing that, she was like, that was probably really insensitive. And she says, that was probably really insensitive. You are the only other African American man in this room. Like,
Oh,
okay,
right.
I get it. But in the moment, like, no one, if I was like, if I kept, beating my point across,
Right.
like, it wasn't going to get us anywhere. And I think
Right.
if I say anything to anyone else is like, when you're in those moments of conflict, you also have to look at, is this person, ready to receive the information that you're being able to give? Have you
Mm,
built the relationship enough where you can actually not only give the recommendations, but you can also give critical feedback. Um,
yeah.
and if you can't answer those two things and you don't know if it's, the function of why you're talking, then shut
Hmm.
up.
Yeah,
You
right.
really just gotta shut up.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad used to always say the less said, the better. So, and honestly, in those types of meetings, because I had been in them for most of my career, I really just started. That's why I started this podcast. I said, because of my old job, I don't do that job anymore. I don't have to, but I was like, I don't speak unless spoken to, but I actually have a lot to say because sometimes it is the less said, the better. And sometimes people, my dad used to always say, misplaced aggression. I mean, people were emotionally charged in those meetings. And so I love that idea of like, it's an empathetic moment and thinking about asking yourself, even just rhetorically, like, how can I support you? Like, obviously, something's going on here that's not just about this actual meeting in this moment in time, right? There's a lot of learned history of all these meetings before because this person had an older, child they're supporting. And if we could just all say to ourselves, how can I support you? Like, even in our brains, when somebody is having an emotional response, I think that we would just be getting along with people a lot better in our field, don't you think?
Yeah. And honestly, like you survey 25 behavior analysts, you're gonna get 25 different responses
Hmm.
with people. And I even realized like as I was, taking inventory over that experience, like I recalled it and I was like, you know what? I could smile now because like honestly, I realized like it was like and I had this I kind of played it back again with some of my supervisees.
Yeah.
And the thing that we came up with was like, it's okay. You can be right now.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
Hmm.
And this supervisor says like, what you should have said is in your mind, it's okay. You can be right now. So
Hmm.
like, this idea that this notion that like when you talk about soft skills, like a lot of times people are in this like circle where, oh, I gotta prove my point and I'm listening to prove my point. And then because I'm listening
Yeah.
to prove my point, everything else is just evidence to why my point is right.
Hmm.
You start to
Yeah.
look at it like, yeah, you're right. You literally can be right now.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. That's good. That would save us a lot of heartache, I'm sure. So where do you think people who are like students are new to the profession, what can they do to increase their soft skills? Probably just hoping that you have a good mentor or a supervisor or, but I think if you're newly minted and you don't have this in your own environment, there's definitely people that offer mentorship. That's something we do at the ABA Speech Connection. We do like these monthly CEU courses where, I'm on live and things like that. But you think kind of getting a mentor if you don't have that in your own clinical
Yeah.
or school-based environment is important.
So I had a supervisor that she really kind of opened up my ability to think about your first year of being or your first few years of being a behavior analyst.
Mm-hmm.
It, two things. She was like, "Hey, if you're gonna take the larger roles that require you to be like maybe a clinical director or
Mm-hmm.
requires you to have a high billable number, and you're gonna take the money." Then do yourself a favor. Also, that means you have to invest in yourself. So that means that you're networking with other professionals in the community. You're not only
Hmm.
networking, you're setting up like case conceptualizations with them. You're not only setting up case conceptualization, you are now having a group of colleagues where you can kind of bounce things off.
Hmm.
You can do those things. You can go into and I just look at it this way. Like a lot of times, what I've seen is that people will say, well, you can't do this, right? As a newly minted BCBA. Well, no, it's not that you can't do it. You probably should do it under these particular contexts or pretenses.
Hmm.
And I think that, supervision is great, but how do you build your network? How do you not only build your network, you also have colleagues that are going to not just agree with you. So I have a group of colleagues that I will pitch something to them and that's not it. Uh-uh. That's,
Right.
and everyone needs those type people.
Hmm.
If you want, and from my success, what I've seen is that when you not only are supported in mentorship, but you have a group of colleagues in which that you can be authentically yourself. And then the last
Yeah.
one is how do you continue to build your skills? So like
Right.
just because I figured out how to use this one part of ABA doesn't mean that I mastered like all parts of it.
Right.
And so I look at it like, oh, this is what it looks like in a leadership role. And then this is what ABA looks like as a direct practitioner. And then this is what
Mhm.
ABA looks like when we are working with parents and we're working with, and honestly, I've had some experiences outside of like the traditional ABA where I'm like, you know what? Your company has a hard time with getting people to show up to work. I can help you there.
Yes.
Like
OBM.
yeah.
Yes. Right.
So and I was like, and honestly, it is a bit of OBM, but just kind of had a basic foundation of what works for people.
Right. Right.
How do you just solve basic problems?
Yeah, right. ABA definitely tightens all that up, and you see it
Mhm.
everywhere. You're like, oh, this, I just started a new Pilates gym and I'm like seeing all the corporate things and I'm like, oh, they need help with this. They need help with it. You know what I mean? I'm like,
Where's
do they have
society
somebody
here?
on staff? Do they have somebody at corporate? The brain never stops. Oh my gosh. Well, this is such a great conversation. I love it so much. I don't know, where can people find out more about you and your work? I'm not sure, I have your talk in my Behavioral Live because, I
Yeah.
signed up for that conference. I don't know if it's still available virtually or if you have a website or where can
Yeah,
people
yeah.
reach you if you have a
Uh,
question?
So right now, I'll leave your audience with my LinkedIn as
Okay,
well as my
great.
email address. And honestly, I'm just out here doing the work. Uh,
That's right.
so the work for me is being able to build not only a brand that makes sense for me, but also being able to build connections. And so I'm easily accessible. Send me an email, send me a LinkedIn message. And I honestly would love to connect and hear other stories about how they've not only developed their soft skills, but how are they developing as a clinician.
Well, I love it. And I'll put your LinkedIn, I'll put because we're connected on LinkedIn. I know that's where I connect with you first. I'll put that in the show notes so people can reach out to you. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really great to connect.
Thank you.